Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elane O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology. Hi.
Hi.
So we're laughing because this is our third episode that we've recorded since we've been here in Truckee. And
the first one with any alcohol.
And the first one with alcohol. We have moved on. We're having a really nice Riesling, Kung Fu Girl. Mm-hmm. It's not a super expensive one, and it's pretty widely available. I've seen it in Nashville, and it's yummy, and it's chilled.
And it's got a little sweetness, a little acid. It's quite good. Mm-hmm. It's perfect early afternoon glass of wine.
It is.
And it's not as early in the afternoon as it might have been.
That's true.
I feel very virtuous.
I feel like we held off a long time. We had coffee and breakfast and lunch and
lots
more
of water.
coffee and water and...
Yeah, we've done all of that.
We've done all those things.
We've done all the things.
All the things.
And now we're moving on. Yeah, all the things have been done.
And now we're moving on to other things that haven't been done.
Wait a minute. If we've done all the things, then what are we moving on to?
I don't know. I guess we haven't really done all the things.
Dang it.
Just some of the things.
Okay, fine. So we are in the middle of this kind of marathon recording of Cocktail Theology, and we went up into the mountains to have quiet and lack of interruption in this crazy season of pandemic and elections and fire and justice seeking and all of these things. And here we are.
And it's interesting. I mean, we're in September of 2020 right now, and we've not put out much in the way of Cocktail Theology this year. However, we have been online a lot. We've been connecting with people in new and different and sometimes uncomfortable ways, and learning technology and learning what works and learning what doesn't work. And it's been a good time of growth, I think, for us. But it's been a long time, too. I mean, even though we live in the same household and we talk every day, it's been a long time since we've sat across with microphones and done this. It's really interesting because in the first year of this, we were recording
every week,
and sometimes more than once a week. There was an easy rhythm. I think we developed a pretty easy rhythm to this. And because we haven't done it in a while, and even though we talk all the time, this has not been as easy as I thought it might be. So I'm glad though that we're here.
Yeah. This what we are doing right now, minus the microphones, feels so central to our relationship to me that even though we live in the same household, I have missed this tremendously.
And maybe that's it. I think we've just been so in the thick of everything. And when I say everything, I do mean everything. There's been so much. And I know for our listeners, there's been so much. So to press pause on all of that for a couple of days and do this feels really right and good.
Yeah, exactly. So
we're going to tackle something that we both kind of looked at each other and we're like, how are we going to talk about this? But we want to address this because we know that it's a concern for some of our listeners, and it's a concern for us as parents. How do you help your kid when they're dealing with a struggle over identity? And I don't mean the kinds of identity struggles that when I was growing up was like labels like band nerd or freak, which freak back then was just you listen to hard rock music and you wore, leather jackets. I mean, it was like
and was that a world you were sort of, diving into?
I was a freak,
of course.
Or jocks or whatever group it is.
Okay.
But this goes way deeper. I've got a daughter, and Elane has a daughter who would belong to Gen Z. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I have found in talking to my daughter is how there is a fluidity, sort of an easier than in generations past fluidity regarding sexuality and gender. We've seen non-binary come on the scene as a tag or a label that people are adopting for themselves. Being non-binary, which basically, in my limited knowledge, is simply not fully feeling as though you belong to either gender. So sometimes you feel more masculine, sometimes you feel more feminine, sometimes you don't feel like either, sometimes you feel like both, and you don't feel as though identifying yourself as one gender or the other fully captures who you are. While this is not a new phenomenon
at all,
the acceptance of it or the labeling of it or the adopting of that title of non-binary is kind of new and seems to be among kids these days something that is recognized as legitimate, recognized as that's who they are. We were approached about this question because one of our friends is a parent of a child that is sort of in this situation, finds themselves trying to figure out gender. And so while our kids haven't had this specific struggle, certainly we as parents have helped our kids navigate struggle. And as parents, many times we don't know what to say. We don't know exactly what the right thing to do is. But I think in my perspective from my daughter and conversations that we've had where she's been very vulnerable and very raw with me, I find that kind of the first thing that you do is you listen, you fully engage, and you fully listen, and you hear them out. You don't interrupt. You make a lot of nods and sympathetic noises, and I don't mean to minimize that, but you really engage and let them know that you are listening and you are present. And that way they know that they can trust that you will listen, trust that you will hear them out. And then when you say what you say, it's not because you didn't listen.
Right.
I think that today with gender norms changing, it's a very complicated landscape, right? To address that with kids, whether that's their struggle or whether it's your kid coming to you and saying, I have a friend who says they're non-binary, what do I do with that?
Wow, so much. I think it is useful, it may be useful to our listeners who grew up in a more clear or socially recognizable division between what is masculine and what is feminine.
Yeah.
And that masculine went with people who were biologically male and feminine went with people who were biologically female, however you want to frame that. That if you came up in a world that made that distinction very clear, it doesn't have to be as far as like complementarianism, right? But the idea that men are men and women are women and, all of that. If you came up in that, I think the non-binary thing is harder. I didn't come up in that. And I think also because of, I grew up in Southern California, I've always been politically conscious. I've always paid attention to social movement. So even setting myself aside, which is a whole other thing altogether, I was coming up in a time when women were claiming the ability to have more masculine traits. Okay. And from really middle school on, let's just say high school on, my closest friends were very feminine gay men. And of course, feminine and gay had been part of that subculture for a very long, forever.
Yeah.
Masculine and lesbian have been part of that subculture for forever. And so like within that, you've got butch and femme dynamics, which is also a binary.
Right.
But it's a claimed binary, right? And, you have that in gay men's lives as well.
Of course.
At the time I was growing up, I was really aware of all of this.
Yeah.
And my own identity, I've always known I was female, but, I kind of go the gamut of stuff. So I think what's important about this language of non-binary and this language of they is we create labels in order to have political power. And I don't mean political power like how you vote. I mean power to claim one's own space in the polis, in society. Okay. That's the reason we come up with labels. But that sense of not being all one thing or all another is forever. And the question is then, how did people express it? What did the society say about it? In the cultures that had third genders, for example, and it was part of the culture. Don't get me wrong, it was still odd, but it wasn't unthinkable. So I think what's happening with this is that it's being claimed and named.
Right.
So part of what's happening for kids and non-kids in figuring out the non-binary stuff is they've got two things going on. One is, who am I? What does it mean to be me in this body and in the way I think and in my relationships with other people? That's standard. Everyone does that.
Yeah.
But the other piece is, what label am I claiming today? What do I want to be called? How do I want to be seen? And while that's always true of all of us all the time, we now have a set of labels that we can use that we then decide whether we're going to apply them to ourselves or not. So there are two different things happening.
There was this kid who never worried that his dreams were too big. All he knew was life was meant to be lived, and that's what he did. He had music and fun. He drove his Carnegie into the sun. You'd find him marching to the beat of his drum, no matter what might come.
I really resonated with what you said about the way you've listened to your daughter. And I wanted to add one thing to that. I thought your description was 99% perfect. The one thing I would add is, in doing that kind of deep listening, as a parent or as anyone, if you're doing deep listening, if you catch yourself thinking ahead to, but what if? Or, but what about? If any but comes up, you need to just say, okay, that's not what we're doing right now. Because I think especially as parents, we get really concerned for what's going to happen for our kids, what their lives are going to look like.
Yes.
If X is true, what is that going to look like when you're 50? But when we're listening for understanding, we have to let that go. We have to let that go. Because A, we can't predict the future. B, we can set people up for success in certain ways. But the most important thing is getting to understand what's going on for our kids. Even if we don't understand it for ourselves, we understand that it is in fact going on for our kids. And that this is the way they see it, whether or not they are right. Yes. So I wanted to add that.
That's good.
Future thinking doesn't help.
No, it doesn't.
So I don't know if this is useful, but I wonder if the trying to figure out what gender, if gender, how to name that, where you fit, isn't similar to the figuring out of racial identity or cultural identity when you cross many of those.
Oh, sure, right.
And I am not multiracial, but my daughter is. I've had a lot of friends who were. So I understand a tiny bit about that whole, what does it mean to be coming up in multicultures? And what does it mean to look like one thing but be more complicated than that?
Right.
Do I accentuate that? Do I push that away? Do I go hang out with people who are more like that? How do I navigate both the understanding of who I am and the richness of that and the confusion of that?
Yes. Right.
And the social stuff of it. It's like, what was that? I've forgotten. There was a law. Part of the miscegenation laws were 1 drop of black blood made you black, right? Which is just such a weird idea. But there is that thing of visuals, and whiteness is such a narrow category that visuals affect how we think about it. I have Jewish friends who come from cultures that are browner and curlier haired, and they don't fit into that notion of whiteness, right?
Right.
So there's that. I think there's some of that in the understanding of people figuring out gender, sexuality, which are not the same,
Not the same thing
at all, and what culture we live in, how we name ourselves, that kind of thing. So I think there's some similarity in that.
I think so too.
And it may be useful for people who are new to the idea that gender is even a question, or that one might not have gender, which I actually don't think is true. I don't think that's possible. It might be helpful to think more in terms of the multiracial thing. Maybe going back a little bit to the gender and sexuality, one of the people who has asked us about this identifies as lesbian.
Yes.
Is a woman married to a woman. I think for her, the sexual identity she had to grapple with, but I don't think she's grappled exactly with gender in the same way. That's different than looking at your kid who you've known for a long time. I mean, it's the parent problem, right? Mm-hmm. You've known for a long time, understanding perhaps their sexual identity, but then they get in this whole gender thing, which has never been a particular issue for you.
Right.
It's hard to wrap your brain around, and that's where that listening comes in.
Yeah.
Right? For me, having not grown up in very, very strict rules about what was feminine, what was masculine, what did women do, what did men do, those things were breaking down a little bit. The gender stuff was breaking down. I don't have a problem with that particularly.
Right. I think a lot of this may center around self-awakening. I don't mean that that's a simple thing. Coming of age. Everyone goes through a self-awakening. Everybody goes through figuring out who they are, where they fit in the world. And of course, we spend our entire lives. But so much happens in adolescence and pre and post-adolescence where so much of that is shaped for us. And some of it we choose, and some of it we don't. I grew up in a very loving home. I didn't feel in any way restricted on who I was, how I expressed myself, or any of those things. I recognized that I was different from an early age. I'm certain my parents did. Because I felt accepted and because I felt okay, I was able to deal with some of those things, at least between my ears. Now, I took my faith very seriously. I had a religious experience when I was 10 years old. That was transformative for me. And from that point on, I held myself to a very, very high standard as far as what I thought God wanted from me and what God expected from me. So the conflicts that I had internally over who I was becoming, whether I liked that or not, whether I wanted that to happen or not, who I was attracted to, all of that stuff, the conflict that was there was largely self-imposed because of the views that I had of God and what God thought of me and what God thought of people who were different. And so it took years of working through that and coming to feel accepted and loved by God that I could finally start to front and center deal with, who I love, who I'm attracted to, how I want to live my life, etc. I had already made choices leading up to that were based on a different paradigm.
Right.
That then had to be adjusted, shifted, undone, which in some cases was incredibly painful, in some cases incredibly liberating. Mm-hmm. I think the really great thing about kids right now is that maybe I'm not saying that there aren't kids that don't grow up in the same kind of environment that I did, whether it's self-imposed or parents or church or whatever. But I think that the culture at large is more accepting of people who want to be different. At least the kids are accepting of one another. If you want to be different, if that's who you want to be today, great. Mm-hmm. If that's who you want to be somebody different tomorrow, great. At least that's the experience that I'm getting and talking with my daughter and watching the way she interacts with her friends, both publicly and off to the side.
Right.
So I think that part's great. As a parent, and we all bring our own stuff to this, it's not that easy to navigate. When your kid is like dressing one way today and listening to one kind of music, and then the next day they're dressing this way and this kind of music, and next week they have this group of friends, and the week after that they have that group of friends, it's really hard to hold on while all these things are changing.
What week are we in?
And who is it we like right now? And that can be a lot of whiplash for a parent. And I think learning how to, like you said, your upbringing was different in that wasn't as jerky an experience.
Binary.
Yeah, right. Growing up in the South, or growing up in a more rigid church, or growing up with parents that have very traditional ideas of gender and sexuality, there are plenty of reasons why that can be a challenge for a kid in a home or for a parent with a kid that's dealing that way. The answers are about as different as there are people on the planet in the way that you deal with it. You know your kid better than anybody.
Right.
And so you're going to relate to your kid in a way that you know how to relate, and you're going to adapt and adjust as you can, as you have to. Sometimes you'll do it gracefully. Sometimes you'll do it kicking and screaming. Sometimes you won't do it, and then you lose your kid for a while.
Yeah.
But I think that listening and being present and all that is incredibly important, and understanding that their experience is not your experience.
Right.
What my daughter experiences or what my boy's experience is, it's not the same thing that I experienced.
Right.
I'm not the same parent my dad was.
Right.
And they're not the same kid I was.
Right.
So our experiences are very, very different.
I lost him for a while, forgot what gave that kid his smile. I let the winding years and miles take too much. His heart still beats in me, and he's not scared of anything. The guy I'm growing up to be looks a lot like me at 17.
Going back to something you said about as you came into your sexuality as a grown-up, having to kind of crush one paradigm, take on another one, take other, you know what I mean, figure that piece out. I wonder if part of what is going on for younger people is, as you said, the society is more open to flexibility in that.
Yes.
I think overall that's true. Even in the most conservative places, they're still more open to it than they were 50 years ago.
Yes.
But I think the other thing that's really helpful to remember is that from pre-adolescence to about age 25, this is your job. Your job is to break away from your parents and to establish yourself as a social creature. So you stop identifying with your parents in the same way, hopefully, and you start identifying both against them, but also for the other people you're moving around with.
Yeah.
I think remembering that can be hugely helpful. So I can imagine a parent of our parents' age who might have said, sure, you go dressed like that this week, you go dressed like that next week. It's a phase.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Very accepting, but you'll grow out of it and become just like me. Right? Instead, thinking in terms of this is how they are coming to see themselves in the world through other people's eyes, through other people's labels, through all of that, plus their own. And yeah, they're going to be trying on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean any of them isn't true.
Right.
Right? They may wear dresses and combat boots and do roofing and needlepoint. They may do all those things, try on other things, and come back to that.
Of course, yeah.
Right?
Right.
I think the other thing that is maybe useful to those of us who grew up with expectations about how we could earn our living, for example, that a lot of that has changed, and we just don't get it. Resumes don't look the same, right? They literally don't look the same. Everybody is worried about making a living right now, and many people are struggling. Some of the norms of making a living have changed, right? So if your biologically male kid turns out to claim the label of non-binary, experience themselves as non-binary, and pansexual, and multiracial, let's just add everything in there. That doesn't mean they can't have a picket fence and kids. That doesn't mean they can't become airline pilots, right? The paradigms are more flexible.
Yes, right.
So I think as parents, if we can kind of, back up our terror and say, okay, wait a minute. There are things I have learned about the world that are probably true. And there are things I don't know about the world or that my experience wasn't. So let me listen and try and suspend my disbelief for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to say that. Yeah. Yeah. What about the kid that is grappling with these things? I'm kind of taking this from the position of a kid that's confidently moving between all these different pieces. But the truth is many kids are not confidently moving through any pieces.
Right.
And so how do you help your kid who maybe biologically male, but today feels more female, but then tomorrow feels more male. And like they want to belong somewhere.
Yeah, that's the piece, right?
They want to be able to fit someplace. I mean, do you tell them, ride this out, you'll figure it out, or it will come to you, or it will work itself out, or, I mean, I don't know. That's a tricky bit, because my kids have seemed to navigate things much more confidently than I did. And so when we have conversations, I'm the one catching up. But for the parent whose kid is really kind of floundering a bit, that's where it can get tricky as a parent, because you're not in their high school, you're not in their friend group, you're not in their head. So even though you know them really well and you know how you would like to see things play out, and you know how you hope things will play out, you can't always say, well, of course it's going to work out like this, because this is how things work out.
But don't you think that's true for any kind of grappling? I think sometimes we mystify particular kinds of grappling.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That's how it is with all kinds of grappling. A long time ago, when I was doing philosophy professionally, I had two philosopher friends who were married, and their kid was not a student. He was not interested in reading. He did not think that way. That was not how he was at all. He was very physical. He was very, working class from the out. You know what I mean? Like, that's where he identified. And he was struggling in that household. Okay. I mean, just struggling. And they loved him and tried to listen, but they were struggling too, because they could not see a life for him, right? So I think the grappling part is always the grappling part. The question is then, as parents, how do we kind of create a safe place for them to grapple?
Yes, right.
They're not going to tell us the stuff they're really grappling with. They're just not. They're going to give us the stuff they're sort of grappling with. The stuff they're really grappling with, they probably don't even have words for. And so they're trying to live it out, right? That's how they do that, through experience and through reading and through, whatever, music. My child is 12. So ask me this again in 3 or 4 years. But I do think that one thing we can do is stuff like, this is going to sound ridiculous. Have you heard any music you like lately? Who are you listening to? Just stuff like that. What YouTube videos are you watching? And just be curious. I mean, truly curious, not condemning, but just, hey, can you shut, because I don't know and I'd like to know. Yeah. Doing that kind of observational stuff. I think getting help from professionals, not in terms of how to fix your kid or how to deal with your kid, but in terms of things like, what does this part of the world look like that I don't know about? Right? So if you're the parent of an LGBTQ, add a letter here, child, tracking down your local P flag, right? Parents and friends of lesbians and gays.
Yes.
Because you're talking to people who've gone through it and who have resources and who have had to think about it. And there are lots of those kinds of groups. This is not the first, as you point out, this is not the first time people have done this.
Yeah.
The fact is people have been grappling with gender for a very, very, very long time. They've just done it differently, and there hasn't been a word.
Yeah.
So tracking down those resources can be useful.
Right.
But I think a lot of it is that understanding that it's your kid's job to go through this right now.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it.
Really listening, really watching, as if you were an anthropologist, right? So that's how they behave in this wild, right? And then asking for small bits of involvement, small bits of sharing. And when they scream, F you, you don't understand, is saying, yeah, I don't, but I'd like to understand a little bit better.
Yeah.
Can you help me a little bit with that? Or can you point me to someone who could help me with that?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
That's good. And, some of our listeners may be dealing with these kinds of issues. It's not isolated to kids. Like I said, I didn't really come to terms with my own struggles around sexuality until I was an adult. So if that is a struggle that you are dealing with, whether it's around gender or sexuality, know that we support people of faith from all kinds of genders and sexuality.
And are people of faith from all kinds.
And are people of faith from all kinds of, yes. So you've got a place here. You've got a home with us. A lot of the work that we do is with folks from LGBTQ plus backgrounds and people that have those identities, and some that are confident in them and some that are not. Mm-hmm. Our baseline is God loves and accepts us all. So if you can accept that as your baseline, then you can start to build a life of faith on that, regardless of what you've been told, regardless of what you think about yourself or feel about yourself. You can start to build a life of faith on that.
Right.
We are testaments to that ourselves, and we talk to so many people that have made that journey and continue to make that journey.
Yes.
So there is hope.
Yes.
For all of us.
Absolutely.
For all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we would love to hear from you. We'd love to know what your struggles are, where your joys are, where your triumphs are. We'd love to hear all of that. I do spiritual guidance sessions, and I'm more than happy to arrange that with you, which is not, and here's what you need to do for God right now. And it's not, oh yeah, everything is okay, because that's not true either, right? But we want to know, and to put a very tight point on it, okay? We are open to LGBTQ, et cetera, people because we are LGBTQ, et cetera, people.
Exactly.
And so we've been through this and still go through it in weirder ways.
Of course.
Like not being seen that way. Like because we live in a primarily straight culture, we're not always seen as that. And it's like, but I'm here. And because neither of us is grappling with it, we don't feel the need to throw a label out immediately.
Yeah.
Right. And here I am in my identity as a
right.
We get it. And we know we don't get everything you're going through. And so we want to hear about it and learn from you and weep with you and triumph with you.
Yeah.
So.
And if you are a parent that have had some success.
Oh, yeah.
We want to know that too.
Yeah.
Because we are learning as parents as well.
And I have a 12-year-old. Did I mention the 12-year-old?
Mine are a bit older, but yeah.
So for our listener who suggested this question, I hope that we gave you something. I hope that, and if you want us to tease out something else, please let us know, because we're happy to do that. This may be incoherent outside of this room, and that would be okay. Just let us know and we'll try again.
And we'll try again. That's right. That's right.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. Bye.